So welcome to this Parent and Carer webinar, and today we're going to be looking at how to support your child's sleep. My name is Caroline Gibbs. I'm a clinical psychologist working in the Education Wellbeing Service across South West London and St George's, and I'm also a qualified sleep consultant, so this is really an area of interest for me. And just to say, we're primarily going to be thinking about primary school age children during this webinar today. We do have a separate webinar for teenagers and older adolescents. So if you have older children and you're more interested in hearing about supporting your teenager to sleep, then please check that out on our YouTube channel. As I said, today we're going to be focusing more on those primary school age children. So people's choices about how their family choose to sleep can lead others to have quite strong opinions or feelings. And as a parent or carer, you've probably received quite a lot of advice about your child's sleep, whether wanted or not, right from their birth. And so it's really important to start this presentation today by saying that your child or your family's sleep habits are only a problem if they're negatively impacting you or your child. So if you're very happy spending a lot of time with your child as they're falling off to sleep and settling them, and they're happy about this, they're sleeping well, everyone's refreshed in the morning, it's not an issue. Equally, if you're co-sleeping as a family and this is working for you, we're really here sort of not to say that you need to change those sleep patterns. However, if the way you're settling your child to sleep, or for example, if co-sleeping, or the way that you're managing nighttime wakes, for example, is causing either you or your child to feel really exhausted, perhaps affecting you the next day, then this is what we're going to think about today in terms of what changes might you be able to make so that you're all getting a better night's sleep. And whilst there are common methods which might help to contribute to a better night's sleep, we do also recognise that every family is different. What works for one family might not work for someone else's. So we always tend to ask, is it working for you? Is it working for your child? And if the answer is yes, then you really don't need to do anything differently. It doesn't matter what other people think or what other people sort of advise you to do. You know, we know that cultural habits around sleep vary greatly, not only across the world, but within our own country. So really just thinking about what is right for you, your child and your family. So today we're going to be thinking about why sleep is so important. We're going to touch on the circadian rhythm and really thinking about how we can strengthen our internal body clock. We'll also look at why creating an effective sleep environment and a routine is so important, particularly for this age group, but also for older teenagers and adults. We're going to look at why independent settling is so important for a good night's sleep. And then finally, night waking and co-sleeping. So why is sleep so important? Why are we doing this webinar today? Well, our service has a particular interest in sleep because we know now that sleep and mental health are very strongly connected. We know that high quality sleep has been associated with better mental health outcomes for people of all ages, and poor mental health has been associated with poor sleep. And it's not always easy to establish whether it's the sleep that's the main culprit or the mental health difficulties, so whether one is sort of exacerbating or causing the other. But what we do know is that often, if you make improvements and you target sleep as an area, this tends to have a significant and positive impact on mental health, even with very serious mental health difficulties. So it's something we take really seriously. It's worth holding in mind that, you know, if there are, for example, very long waiting times for mental health services, we know that some CAMHS services are really struggling with this, that actually there are things we can do at home. Focusing on sleep might be one area that then has a knock-on positive effect for your child's mental health. And often when we're talking about sleep, we can become a bit preoccupied with how much sleep we're having in terms of the number of hours we're having. And whilst this is definitely important to hold in mind, it's not the only thing that we need to pay attention to. So we also need to think about the timing and the quality of the sleep that we're having. So with timing, what time do we fall off to sleep? What time do we wake in the mornings? Are those happening generally at the same time every day? And the quality of sleep really is around how refreshing and how restorative that sleep is for us. So as you can see here, we move through 4 stages of sleep cycles during the night. Each sleep cycle tends to last between around 80 to 100 minutes, and it's these 4 stages that make up the sleep cycle. So we move from being awake to falling into a light sleep, into a deep sleep, and then into an REM sleep, which is where we dream. And all stages of sleep are important, but it's that deep, slow wave sleep that's particularly important, because it's in this period of sleep where we start to feel restored and rested. This is where our body is really kind of doing the work, so repairing the tissues. It's where our cell regeneration happens, where our immune system strengthens. So it's where we're fully relaxed, but there's a lot going on internally that helps us and helps our physical development. So if we wake frequently throughout the night, it interrupts these stages of sleep, and it means that we might not get into that slow wave sleep as often as we could, or it might not last as long. And similarly, if we're going to bed late and we're having to wake up early to get to school on time, we might have missed a whole sort of cycle, and therefore a whole cycle of that deep, slow wave sleep. So we're less likely to feel rested. And so we've talked about the link between mental health and sleep, but we know that sleep has such a huge impact on so many aspects of our lives. So we know that if your child is sleeping well, they're much more likely to be alert and focused and able to think clearly the next day. We know that there's strong links now between physical health functioning and sleep and good physical health. You know, having that opportunity for our body to repair itself. That's why sleep is so important. If we're feeling poorly, that we give our bodies a chance to recover and repair. Something we can all relate to, I think, if we've had a good night's sleep, we're much better able to regulate our emotions and to cope with the daily stresses, and our mood is likely to be improved. And we also know now there's a strong link between poor sleep and obesity. So actually having a good night's sleep is so important for us to maintain healthy weight. And one of the things that families often will talk to us about during our sessions is around those family relationships. So if we're all sleeping well, generally family functioning tends to be a little bit better, because everyone's feeling rested, everyone's feeling in a better mood, able to cope with sort of daily stresses and strains. Whereas if one person in the family is not sleeping well, often if a child's not sleeping well, then generally at least one parent or carer is also having a disrupted night's sleep. And this can really impact on how everyone's feeling and how everyone's getting on together over the course of the day. So really something that people want to kind of improve for that reason too. Now, many parents report that their children experience anxiety about bedtime. So sometimes it's because they're afraid of the dark. You know, nighttime is an opportunity for our imaginations to run a little bit wild. Sometimes it's about separation from parents or carers. So having to actually be in their own sleep space and on their own can be difficult. And there's particular sort of developmental points in a child's development where that might feel more challenging than others. And we also know that stress and anxiety can become magnified at bedtime. You know, as adults, I'm sure we can all relate to that. If we've got things on our mind, you know, either falling off to sleep can become really difficult, or we might find ourselves waking up more than usual thinking about what's on our mind. So, you know, if we've had a bad night's sleep, that then sort of exacerbates the stress the next day. And that's where we see that vicious cycle start to develop. So whilst we would pretty much always say that working on improving sleep is a good idea, we do obviously need to look at the whole picture when addressing a child's sleep. And if there are concerns about anxiety, or perhaps there's things going on in your child's life, whether it's at school, perhaps there have been some changes in the family or their routine, we know that it's really common to see sleep being impacted on this. And if it is a sort of life change or a transitional period, we would normally expect sleep to settle back down once the child has adjusted. But we do have videos on our YouTube channel about supporting children with anxiety. And we also really recommend the following book. This is the Kathy Creswell and Lucy Willett's book. We use this with our parenting interventions when working with parents who have children who are feeling worried or anxious. It's really, really accessible, got lots and lots of real life examples. Parents give us really good feedback about this book, just really easy to understand and to digest and to dip in and out of as well. You can get it on audiobook now as well, and it's been translated into lots of different languages. So really recommend this one. Okay, so we're going to start thinking about what changes we can make and sort of things to hold in mind when we're trying to improve your child's sleep. And the number one thing we always come to is the circadian rhythm and our internal body clock. So we all have a body clock, and this is scientifically known as our circadian rhythm. And our body clock helps us to feel awake or sleepy at certain times of the day by releasing chemicals into the brain. So it's melatonin, that's our sleep hormone, and this is released during the course of the evening to help us to fall asleep. And cortisol, which is probably better known as our stress hormone, this is released in the early hours, and it's actually what helps to wake us up in the morning to get us going. And it's worth perhaps just mentioning here that for those of you with teenagers, or perhaps those who are going to be teenagers in the next few years, that your melatonin production shifts during the teenage period until our early 20s. So the time that our melatonin is produced moves later. And this is why teenagers are often not very tired in the evening, and they start to want to go to bed later, and often why they're really struggling to get up in the morning, because the melatonin production doesn't sort of reduce until later on in the early hours of the morning. So it's not because they sort of can't be bothered to get up, or you know, teenagers are lazy. It really is that because there is a biological shift at this time. The good news is there are lots of things we can do to regulate and to strengthen our body clock to ensure that those sleepy periods line up with bedtime and the wakeful periods line up with the daytime. So key to setting our body clock is actually something we can do in the morning rather than before we go to bed. And it's all about using daylight as a sort of natural alarm system to let our body know that it's the daytime. So where possible, really opening up the curtains in the morning, getting that natural daylight into the room. If possible, even stepping outside into the daylight. That's perhaps more doable in the summer months when the mornings are a bit more inviting. In the winter months where it can be quite dark in the morning and we can't sort of access that daylight in the same way, even using a bright light inside can help things to kind of kick things into gear. Some people find the SAD lamps quite helpful because they mimic a sort of very bright daylight environment. You can buy them online now, sort of varying price points. I think you can get some for about £30 online. And really it's that light exposure that sets us up for the day. It lets our bodies know that it's the morning time, and it actually sends a signal to our brain to know to release the melatonin around 12 to 14 hours later. So it's that daylight that really kind of sets the body clock going. But sort of coupled with that, and something that goes hand in hand with that, is also having a regular bedtime and wake time. So as best you can, trying to go to bed at the same time every evening and waking up at the same time each morning, and actually trying to be as consistent as possible with that over the weekends as well. So you're kind of really setting yourself a nice routine. You know, human beings really sort of do well with a sort of rhythmic routine. And then thinking about your younger children, if you do have, even you might have children at nursery or even younger. So by the time children get to about 4 years old, we would say best for them to avoid daytime naps, as having a sleep during the day can result in them not having quite enough sleep pressure to fall off to sleep at night or to propel them throughout the whole night's sleep. Also with your younger children, you might want to think about limiting how much they drink in the hours up to bedtime, because they might find it a little bit more difficult to go through the whole night without needing the loo. Thinking about when you're eating in the evening, so best not to go to bed very hungry or equally on a very, very full stomach. Caffeine, obviously, to sort of bear in mind, it takes around 5 hours for caffeine intake to half in the body. And it's not just in tea or coffee. So thinking about chocolate contains caffeine, energy drinks, fizzy drinks, energy bars, and often actually in cold and flu medication. So if your child is poorly, perhaps looking out for the versions of the medication that have no caffeine in, so that won't interfere. And then, of course, the screen time. So thinking about the blue light that we have on our screens, whether it's phones or iPads or even the television, it's inhibits our melatonin production, because it's not telling us, not telling our body that it's time to sleep, because that light is coming into the brain and keeping it sort of active, signaling that it's still time to stay awake. So really, as best you can, avoiding any screens before bed. And we would say that for any age group all the way up to adults. And thinking about how much sleep your child might need. So as you can see, babies and toddlers obviously require a lot of sleep over a 24-hour period. Some of this will obviously take place as naps during the day. And then the amount of sleep that we need reduces as we get older. But it is often a spectrum. So children and adults, we all vary in the amount of sleep we need. And we sometimes refer to this as being a high sleep needs individual or a low sleep needs individual, in that we function best on slightly different amounts of sleep. So as an example, I'm a high sleep needs individual. I tend to feel better. I tend to function a lot better when I've had closer to 9 hours sleep. But many adults will function really well and at their best and feel good on just 7 hours sleep. So it's worth holding this in mind. You might have several children who have varying sleep needs. So it might be that you even have an older child who needs slightly more sleep than your younger child. And it's also worth holding in mind the cumulative impact of sleep. So if we have one night where we're not sleeping so well, it's not usually very much of a problem. But if over the course of several nights, several weeks even, or long term, if we're not getting as much sleep as we need, we tend to develop a sleep deficit. And this can start then to have negative effects on how we're feeling and how we're functioning. Okay, so coming on to thinking about a sleep environment and a sleep routine. So really, as best as we can, or as much as we can do to sort of facilitate a positive sleep environment, what we're aiming for really is for your child's sleep space to be a place where they can feel relaxed and calm, and if possible, kind of clear of distractions. And we're really conscious that many of us are living in much more crowded conditions. It might be that there are several members of the family sharing a sleep space or a room to sleep in. It might be that your building that you're living in is really quite busy or noisy. Perhaps you're on a loud road. So these are just things that you can think about when you're sort of supporting your child's sleep. It might not be that all of these are going to be spot on, but these are the things that we kind of tend to check in about with families. So calming colours in the bedroom and trying to keep the light sort of lower in the later part of the evening as they're winding down to bed. So kind of creating that calm environment. If you do have access to them, or you can get some sort of blackout blinds, or you can buy sort of stick-on removable blackout things for your windows now. The reason we suggest this, particularly in the summer months, is that it can get light very, very early in the mornings. And so having a sort of blackout situation can stop children waking up very early. Also, darkness helps our melatonin production. So if we can create a sort of dark environment, generally this leads to us sleeping a little bit better. But obviously we know that many children find the dark intimidating or a bit scary. So absolutely fine to use a bedtime lamp. We tend to recommend using an amber or a red light, because this doesn't inhibit melatonin production. So as I said, absolutely fine to use a nighttime lamp, but ideally with a red or amber bulb, that can be really helpful. Not always possible, but where you can, sort of keeping the area sort of relatively clutter free. So you might incorporate a bit of a tidy up time as you're winding down for the bedtime routine, just to try and create that sort of message and that space that it's time to kind of get ready for bed. Obviously noise levels. So again, we know this isn't always possible, but where we can, to keep the noise levels low. If you are in a particularly noisy building or on a noisy road, sometimes we might recommend using white noise to drown out some of that external noise. That can help people to sleep a little better. We know that many adults also find white noise helpful to sleep with. Often it's people use it when their babies are very young, because it mimics the noise of the womb, but actually people of all ages can benefit from listening to white noise. And also the temperature. So people are often surprised to find out that a cooler bedroom is actually better. We tend to sleep better in a cooler room. And then you can use the bedding to make sure that you're nice and warm and cozy. But the bedroom, ideally, or the sleep space, we would want to be between 16 and 20 degrees. So erring on a cooler side, not having the heating kind of blasting. And in addition to the environment, a bedtime routine is so important because it teaches your child the order of events leading up to bedtime. And this way, your child is given really clear messages about what's coming next. And it makes that evening predictable. Your child isn't going to know what's happening. They can prepare themselves. And that really helps to reduce those bedtime anxiety levels. So we want to look at a straightforward and simple bedtime routine. So it's about having a calming nighttime activity in the period before bedtime, and then you're shifting that activity into sort of that space between the activity and going to bed. So that's your sort of brushing your teeth, having a wash. It's those signals to your brain that it's nearly bedtime. And then what you do in your bed to feel safe and cozy. We call this the snug time, and then getting ready to fall off to sleep. So an example of a bedtime routine might be firstly, choosing a reasonable bedtime based on when your child needs to be up in the morning. So if they have been going to bed too early or too late, we suggest shifting it each night by around 15 minutes. So it's a gradual move towards the desired bedtime. And then starting that relaxing routine about 45 minutes before bedtime. So the time before your child has a wash or a shower or a bath really should be activities that are calming and non-stimulating. So it might be crafting or jigsaws, perhaps reading stories. Also thinking about perhaps not eating too much at this time. If your child is very hungry, maybe having something like a banana or perhaps a milky drink, anything really that's low in sugar. And then we're going to go to the bathroom or their bedroom or their sleep space to get undressed. And it might be then having a wash of some kind, maybe not every night, but we can sort of use the bath or the wash to sort of both clean off the dirt of the day, but also to unwind and provide that clear step and transition from our daily activities into the sort of bedtime phase. But as I said, just, a flannel wash with your teeth brushing is fine. You don't have to have a full-on bath every evening or a shower. Okay, and then moving your child into their sleep space and having maybe a bit of a chat with them, getting into their pajamas. It might be that you read a story together. Your child might really like to read by themselves for a bit, or possibly listen to an audio story, but really trying to avoid screen times here if possible, and then settling your child into bed. And then once that routine is complete, saying goodnight to your child. Perhaps you might have a particular nighttime phrase that you always use, or maybe sing a song if your child is a bit younger, giving them a big cuddle and then leaving the room. And if your child is used to you being there when you fall asleep, we'll come on to this now in terms of independent settling and why it's important to move towards that if settling your child to sleep is becoming and it's interfering with them getting a good night's sleep. Okay, so independent settling. So why is this something that we focus on with families? And just again to say, if how your child is falling asleep, if you are settling your child or you spend time with them falling asleep, or if you are co-sleeping and it's not a problem, then this isn't something we say you have to do. What we tend to find is some of the difficulties families have around sleep are a result of the child not being able to settle themselves. And the reason for that is because all adults and children move between light and deep sleep throughout the night. So this is the sleep cycles and the sleep stages that we talked about earlier. And during the transition between one sleep cycle to the next, we can be stirred and woken if the conditions have changed from the time that we fell asleep to the sleep cycle shift. So we see this really obviously with small babies. So if you give a baby a dummy when they fall asleep and it falls out during that deep sleep, And then during the sleep cycle transition, they stir and wake up because the dummy is no longer there. So they're looking for it to be replaced. They want those conditions to be exactly the same. And it's exactly the same as your child gets older. So if you cuddle your child to sleep or you sit with them in the room at bedtime, they may then expect you to be there and become alarmed if you're not there as they're moving through their sleep cycles during the night. And what we often see is during that first part of the night when melatonin levels and sleep pressure are very high, you might find that your child kind of pushes relatively easily through those first sleep cycles. But that once you hit sort of midnight, 1 a.m. and those early hours of the morning, it becomes harder for your child to resettle themselves. And this might be when they call out for you or perhaps pay you a visit into your bedroom. So if we're working towards independent sleep and you feel like this might be something that your child would benefit from, in the sense that if they're able to fall off to sleep happily on their own, they're less likely to require your support to get back to sleep during the night. Before you make any changes, it's really important to talk to your child about them and being really clear with them and honest about why it is that you want to make the changes. So it's helpful maybe to give some specific examples. Perhaps your child is missing an activity or social time with friends because they're very tired. Perhaps they're struggling a lot at school because they're very tired. And it might also be that you're really struggling, that actually you're not getting good night's sleep and that's impacting how you're feeling. So being kind of open with them, not in a blaming way, but just explaining why this is something that you want to work on as a family. And within that conversation, really helping your child to understand why sleep is so important for all of us and how it will benefit everyone in the family if they're getting a good night's sleep. And there are some really nice YouTube videos on this, so you can watch them and discuss together about why it is that we need sleep. The QR code on this slide will take you to a video on YouTube that talks about the importance of sleep. And obviously really important to ask for your child's input too. So it's not about doing something to your child, it's about making changes together as a family. So really validating any concerns that your child has, but you might still need to maintain sort of a fairly clear message that although there are concerns, that actually it is something you're going to need to work on. If you're vague about it, about the plans or about what you're wanting to do, this can create sort of high levels of uncertainty and therefore anxiety about the change. So it's best to be as clear as you can. And obviously, as you're working towards independent sleep, you can do this really gradually and involving your child in the plan. So agreeing what you're going to do and when. And it might be that your child is actually ready to make the changes a lot more quickly than you anticipate. Often parents find that making the changes was far easier than they thought it was going to be. And you might also want to think about some low cost or no cost rewards as another sort of motivating factor for your child if this is something that you think they might struggle with. So you're going to sort of gradually move and to support your child towards independent sleep. And in doing that, this example here on the slide sort of shows how if your child is used to having you really very close to them, perhaps in bed with them or next to them in bed as they're falling asleep, this slide talks you through how you would gently and gradually move away from them over the course of a few days. For some families, it might take a bit longer, it might take up to a couple of weeks, but the key really is that every sort of 2 days or so, you want to be doing the next thing or sort of moving a little bit further away, because if you don't move relatively regularly, what happens is you will get stuck. So it might be that you've managed to move out of the bed, but you're sort of stuck on a chair in the middle of the room. And actually what you need to do is keep that momentum going so that you don't then get sort of stuck in another phase. And it might be that your child protests a bit or perhaps pushes against the new rules or tests out those new boundaries a little bit. That's really not uncommon. So they might get upset. They might even become cross with you. So if there's more than one caregiver at home, you might want to do a bit of tag teaming so that you can support one another from one night to the next. And actually, the good thing about that is it also prevents your child from becoming reliant on just one of you putting them to bed. If you are a single caregiver at home and you feel you really want to make some changes, but you think you might struggle, it might be time to call in some recruits. So asking a friend or another family member to come over and give you a bit of moral support for a few nights until things have improved. So if your child does get upset or cross with you, give them a few minutes before going back into the room. This is once you've sort of extracted yourself and you're outside of the room. So give them an opportunity to sort of settle themselves back down. But if they do continue to be really upset, or if they even come out of the room themselves, then the best thing to do is to really keep sort of interaction relatively to a minimum. So it's not about ignoring your child, or we hear people sort of saying, oh, should I not look them in the eye? Or it's not about being unkind to your child, but it's about sort of not creating an opportunity to have lots and lots of interaction with your child, because that then becomes a motivating factor for them to get out of bed. Even if you're getting a bit cross with them, that's more interesting sometimes than lying in bed. So really what you want to do is actually create a slightly kind of boring scenario where actually you're just taking them back, repeating your goodnight phrase, and then leaving the room again. It's really not uncommon for children to come out and make lots of requests as a sort of way of extending or prolonging the bedtime phase. So asking to go to the toilet or a drink. So to sort of minimise that, you might want to keep a small amount of water in their room, making sure they've gone to the loo before bed, and really just, as I said, taking them back to bed, repeating the nighttime phrase, and leaving again. It might be that you're doing that quite a lot over the course of the first few nights, so it can feel quite monotonous and frustrating at times. But if you can be consistent with taking them back to bed and supporting them to fall asleep on their own, once they've got the hang of it, they should be able to manage just fine. And actually, it's important to say, actually, with that if your child is continuing to get up, and by the 10th time of them getting up, you feel as though you can't sort of face putting them back again, and you go back to an old habit, so whether that's going in and lying with them or taking them into your bedroom, essentially what you're doing then is resetting the clock, because what your child learns is, if I get up enough times, then mum or dad will relent and I'll be able to go and sleep in their bed. So it's really important to be able to kind of hold that boundary where possible, in a kind way and in a caring way, but really holding firm on it once you've decided that that's what you want to do. Okay, so night waking. So night waking is not disconnected to independent settling. So as we've said, if your child is not able to settle themselves off to sleep on their own, the chances are they might wake during the night and then require your help to get them back to sleep. So independent settling and helping your child to fall asleep happily and comfortably in their sleep space without your help will often have a positive impact on night waking, and then children are better able to sleep through the night. Having said that, though, it's really important just to bear in mind other things that might be causing them to wake up. So temperature of the room, is it too hot or too cold in there? If your child is unwell, then obviously they might need a bit more support and a bit more input from you overnight. That's absolutely fine. You know, we're not suggesting you leave your child to get on with it if they're poorly. They might need a bit more from you when they're unwell. Any noises, if that's something that might have woken them up, is there something that's happened, perhaps when you're going to bed, have you inadvertently woken them up, or perhaps a sibling? Anything else going on in their lives? So during the daytime, again, holding in mind those sort of transition periods, are there changes in the family or at school? Really, really common to have sleep disruptions when there are sort of changes occurring. So we would expect sleep to improve once things have settled down again. If your child is worried about things, or if there are things going on, we would suggest that nighttime is not the time to have sort of long and lengthy conversations about things. So really sort of explaining to your child gently that, you know, you're going to think about those things in the morning with them, giving them a big cuddle, trying to kind of comfort and soothe them, but not sort of getting into a big conversation about the things that are causing them to feel upset. So yeah, really thinking about wanting to keep stress levels low, So also being mindful of your own kind of stress levels. It can be really frustrating when our children aren't sleeping well, or if they're getting up an awful lot, because that sort of interferes with us having that really important time for ourselves in the evening where we might be getting things done, or even just having an opportunity to relax. So just also being mindful of how you're feeling, and if you're noticing that your stress levels are rising, what can you do to kind of keep yourself calm, to kind of manage that period of time. And this slide really just a reminder to think about how children learn new habits. So from a really young age, children can learn that different behaviours lead to different outcomes, and they start to learn to link particular behaviours with what might happen next. So as I said before, your child, if they come out of their bed, they might learn that this then results in you coming up to their room, maybe spending more time with them, perhaps reading a story, or even taking them to your own bed. And this sort of acts in a way as a reward for your child, and it's therefore more likely to happen again because the child learns that behaviour leads to something that they like. Even if your child is getting out of bed and being kind of told off, you're getting a bit cross, often that's more attention and connection than they were receiving in bed. So when a consequence is repeated over several occasions, a link between their behaviour and your response is formed. So changing sleep and bedtime habits can be a real challenge because these habits can become quite ingrained. So it's really important when your child has been able to change something about bedtime or engage in the sort of more desired behaviour. So perhaps they've gone off to sleep on their own, perhaps they've managed to stay the whole night in their own bed. It's so important to reward them with lots and lots of praise every time they do it until it becomes an established habit. And similarly, if a certain type of behaviour, an undesired behaviour, is ignored, it is less likely to happen again. So again, as we've said, if your child is coming out of bed a lot at bedtime, just not giving it too much airtime, because it's that sort of focus and attention that then can act as a sort of negative reinforcement. So really just paying attention to the behaviours that you want to see again and providing lots and lots of praise and encouragement for those behaviours. So yes, praise is our absolutely sort of number one reward, and we encourage lots of it. And this isn't just around sleep, whenever your child does a behaviour that you really want or appreciate. So whether if they've said thank you, or perhaps they've asked you for something nicely, or they've been polite to another person, really recognising that and commenting on it will help your child to establish that sense of, oh, okay, that's something I should do again, to make them feel good about what they've done. For some families, low cost or no cost rewards are another way of encouraging your child to do something, and particularly if it's a bit of a challenge. So if bedtime changes are something that might be quite tricky for your child, this might be something that you want to put in place, really to help them to feel good about the change and perhaps to act as another motivating factor. So if you do decide to use rewards, it's really important that your child knows exactly how to get that reward and when the reward will stop happening. It's important that they're rewarded every time you have agreed that they will get it. So it might be every time they have behaved the way that you want them to. And as best you can to give that reward as soon as possible. So if you can, doing it the next day, or at least for your child to know exactly when it is that they're going to get it, and then to make sure that that happens. And if you have given your child a reward, it should never be taken away. So even if your child's done something that you've agreed that you wanted them to do, and that they've earned that reward, but then they do another behaviour that is sort of undesirable, try not to sort of put those things together. So continue to give the reward for that behaviour, and then you might want to use an alternative sort of consequence for something else. So don't sort of mix things up. If your child's earned the reward, make sure they get that reward, don't take it away. That can then become sort of quite demotivating for them. So really important to sort of stick to what you've agreed. Okay, a note on co-sleeping, because families sometimes come to us. As I've said before, we know that many families choose to co-sleep. It really is not an issue. We don't have strong opinions about families we don't feel that families shouldn't bed share or co-sleep. It works so well for some families. It can be really a nice thing to do as a family, really comforting for your children, nice for as a parent or carer. So if it's not an issue and it's working for everyone, then continue as is. We really aren't saying you should change that. What we do find is that sometimes families will come to us and say, we love to co-sleep when our children are younger, but they're getting a bit bigger now. None of us are sleeping so well. How do we change this? How do we get them sleeping in their own sleep space? So this is why we thought we'd touch on this today. And really, we would encourage the same plan of action as previously described. So if possible, starting your child off in their own bed or in their own sleep space, and then gently moving away from them over the course of a few days or a week. If your child comes into your bed during the night, then the idea is that you would need to take them straight back to theirs without lots of interaction, repeating your good night phrase and then leaving the room again. If your child has been coming into your bed for a very long time or falls asleep in your bed right from the start, and actually them falling asleep in their own bedroom feels like far too big a jump, then what we would suggest is a bit of a gradual move towards doing that. So it might be, if you have the space, you could put a small mattress next to your bed, so your child sleeps on the mattress while you're in your bed, and they do that for a few nights, and then gradually you move them back into their bedroom. And again, if there's space, it might be at that point your child sleeps in their bed and you sleep on a mattress on the floor for a couple of nights. Again, really holding in mind here that importance of not getting stuck, so not sort of spending weeks and weeks on end if the end goal is to get them to sleep in their own bed without you. So trying to kind of keep things moving every few nights. Obviously rewarding them if they've been able to stay on the mattress for the whole night or in their own bed for the whole night, or if they're making any really good signs that they're trying their best to make those changes. So lots and lots of praise, lots of encouragement. If your child has become an absolute expert in sneaking into your bed like a little mouse, and you're not even waking up at this point, and you wake up in the morning and you're all there again and you sort of think, gosh, how did that happen? I didn't even notice. It sounds a bit bonkers, but actually putting a little bell on your door so that wakes you up as your child enters the room can be helpful. It sounds quite brutal, so perhaps doing this over a weekend if you're working, or perhaps during a school holiday, or during a time where it feels possible or kind of manageable, that you might be waking up a few times during the night and putting them back into their bed. So thinking about the timing might be quite important. But actually, if your child has been able to do it for a few nights, then they should stop waking up. So, as with anything really around sleep, and many things in life, but particularly with sleep, consistency is absolutely key. So it might be that you have to follow these guidelines often. So you might have to repeat over the course of a few days or even a week or two that change you want to see, but you really do need to persevere. If you make frequent attempts to make changes but then revert back, as I've said, your child will learn that by pushing against the boundaries enough, then you will relent or the goalposts will shift again. So what this means is really you have to be committed to make the changes. So don't do it at a time where there's lots of other things going on, either in your life or theirs, thinking about when is it a good time to work on this. And as I've said, if there are two parents or carers at home, agreeing together to find a time to work on this. So really that it works for both of you, that you can support one another and kind of implement those changes together. And really be mindful that it's not unusual for things to seem as if they're getting a bit worse initially. It's not uncommon for children to sort of push against those boundaries or perhaps test out what the new rules are, or as I've said, maybe be a bit upset initially or a bit cross about it. So just being prepared for that. Being empathic with your child, being kind, validate their concern or their distress. Of course, recognising it's not an easy thing perhaps to change for any of you, but still remaining clear and consistent, and you will then see the change. Okay, so just to summarise with these top tips, so just recognising that change will occur gradually. I mean, sometimes families do say, gosh, within, just a couple of nights, it's like, our child was fine, they were sleeping, it really wasn't as bad as we thought. But often it can take a little bit of time. So remembering that change might occur over a period of time. Consistency is absolutely key. Really holding in mind that bedtime needs to be an appropriate time for their age, but also for their sleep needs. So if you have a high sleep needs child, they might need to go to bed a little bit earlier. Or if you have a low sleep needs child, bedtime might need to be a little bit later in order to prevent them from waking up really early in the morning. Involving your child as much as possible with any plan, being creative with it, thinking about how they want to make the changes, what order would they do things in, what rewards might they pick. So trying to get them involved and motivated and enthusiastic as best as possible. And always holding in mind any of those environmental factors that might be waking your child. So actually, there are things you can do, those quick wins around temperature, noise, thinking about what they're eating before they go to bed, how much activity they're during the day. Are they actually expending enough energy to be tired by bedtime? So thinking about all those other factors that might be playing a part in the night time. So creating that step plan, so making small changes over 1 or 2 nights to guide them towards independent settling. Being mindful to be consistent if they are waking or getting out of bed, taking them back to bed, repeating your goodnight phrase, and again, just being really consistent with that. Being mindful that sometimes things can feel a little bit worse or more challenging initially, but really rewarding those positive behaviours. So lots and lots of praise here. Okay, and I've mentioned our YouTube channel a couple of times, so this QR code will take you to that. We've got lots of different videos there about supporting children and adolescents with their mental health. You can also search Education Wellbeing Service on YouTube, and that will take you to our page. Couple of resources here that some parents have fed back have been helpful. This one's probably for older children or even teenagers. It's a sleep diary. So if you've got a child that quite likes to sort of journal or keep track of things or keep diaries, this one is quite useful, and you can sort of look at what kind of things might be impacting your sleep, and that might help you to think about what changes you might want to make. And again, here for older children, or again, if you've got teenagers or preteens, if your child loves a plan, this might be something that they find helpful. And then generally, if you're interested in finding out more about sleep, this book is excellent. Matthew Walker, he's also got lots of really helpful YouTube videos on sleep. Really, really interesting. Yes, very readable. So we always recommend this if you just want to find out a bit more, and if you're interested for yourself as well as an adult. Okay, now just to say thank you really for watching the webinar today. If you have got a couple of minutes to give us your feedback, it really, really helps us to shape the presentations, or if there are other presentations that you want to see us deliver, you can make a note of these on our feedback form. It just takes 2 minutes to complete. So if you have got a couple of minutes, the QR code again here will take you to the feedback form. And if you've got any questions or you want to contact us, our email address here, wellbeingInschools@swlstg.nhs.uk, and you can contact us there. And thank you for joining us.